Thank you, all of you, for these very interesting and insightful presentations. I would like to now open the panel up for discussion from the audience. Any question?
I'm from the School of the Arts, the writing program there, so it's really interesting to be here and hear from more of a pedagogical aspect, what goes on with creativity here. I think I get from what we've been discussing so far that a lot of the focus is on the fixed versus growth-oriented mindset. So like really, what do you have to gain from letting go of certain assumptions and certain ways of like engaging with the world? So I listened a lot to what you had to say about like a different way of learning, an immersive approach to literature, a different way of approaching literature as a storyteller and as a consumer. But I also wonder about what could possibly be at stake for some people who maybe are intimidated by what certain types of literature represent to them. So everyone comes to various types of literature with certain assumptions, right? There's a whole range of it. So if you do that, you're bringing to this literature your experiences, your assumptions, everything that sort of culturally, you embody as a culture and even as a history in some ways. But what is at stake when, and not just with literature, just sort of generally, we can't just sort of figure that out and then say, this is something, as I am as a person, as a human being in this world, as a body, and as a spirit, and it's worth sometimes learning something that is a little different from, what I'm used to, and not having to sort of like separate myself completely from that, or to just like read literature. I'm a little concerned, I guess. I'm very into transmedia storytelling and like Sleep No More and new approaches to all of this. But I think that we should also appreciate what literature and other pure forms of art can offer us if we learn to be patient and we are willing to be a little vulnerable sometimes with our weaknesses and limitations. We are all limited in various ways, and the more we travel, the more apparent it is. So yeah, how do we negotiate that?
I would start by saying yes, absolutely, and, with an ellipsis probably, that I'm in complete agreement, and in no way am I saying that this is how we should always approach any kind of study. This is one piece of a very large puzzle might work, montage. This is one experience in many. What I didn't really talk about that I think might address some of what you were saying is I think of that immersion experience as almost one of the most important outcomes to me is, let me say that a different way. I think that this is a pedagogy of empathy in many ways, that in stepping into and living the literature, this is we're working with these people 8-10 hours a day on the same piece of literature for a couple of weeks, coming at it from, working with choreographers, working with visual artists, working with vocal improvisation teachers, and working with writing instructors who are having them do this thing of constantly and recursively looking in and looking out and looking in and looking out. And, what we carry, which I hear you saying, becomes an enormous part of this curriculum. And not in that kind of, I think, few steps, reader response theory way of kind of, text to self-connection. It's about putting it out and interrogating it as well, making sense out of it. So, you know, you also use the word vulnerability. You know, that's another piece that is at the front of this curriculum for me. And I think, you know, hearing you talk about the ways that we are kind of, you know, deconstructing or unsettling to learn, you know, I'm a huge believer that supported vulnerability. I always ask the question, why do we have to come together to learn? You know, why not be at home reading a book? Why not be at home on a computer if all we're learning is information? What necessitates us being in relationship with each other? And so that curriculum is very much working to, you know, from that place. And so I hope if there were a longer conversation, some of the things that you addressed probably I would have hoped to have teased out in how I believe they are inherent in that curriculum.
I think it's okay for things to happen twice, 3 times. I think that sometimes double action creates structure. I think that structure sometimes can generate more ideas. But I think it's also good to be aware of what that could be associated with, which is a fixed mindset. So, yeah.
There's a whole conversation, I think, to be had about creative constraints, because I think structure, you know, is so often seen as limiting, where my approach is always, and there are times where maybe, you know, lack of structure or even no structure works, but I'm very interested, especially as someone who's preparing classroom teachers and working with classroom teachers, with how structure is liberating, and that, you know, structure is actually incredibly, can be creative constraint, can be generative. And
did you have another question?
I would like to just go back to her comment about doing things twice. In my experience, I work with transformational learning. Many times you can achieve that, but only by doing it twice, so to speak. Because it's like when you get in a river and you step in the river, you might step twice, but it's not the same river. You see what I mean? Yeah, because we can go through the experience, whatever this is, and then when you get out of that experience, you are different. Then when you go back to the same experience, you are actually learning from it, you see? And just that comment about her comment.
Do you wanna? Any of you wanna add to that comment? No.
There's this beautiful film and the Greyhound dog, right? Groundhog Day, right? And everything happens again and again and again, and it's a very wonderful experience to look at it and see how it takes different turns every single day, right? And this is not just doing it twice, doing it for forever. So that's the opposite. I think, as you were saying before, sometimes we need the structure, or we need the high road, and sometimes we can afford to go scenic, so to speak. And there isn't one recipe for it. There's no one recipe for creation or invention. If it were, oh my, that would be a rich company or whatever, right?
Any other question? There.
I have a question for Richard. So, I'm wondering, I'm very amazed by what you presented to us. But I'm wondering, do you think that, but I have a very small question, but it's very individual question. Do you think creativity can happen to everyone in this world? Every human being can be creativity, or it is only a minority thing? Very individual thing. The second question is, so if it is possible that creativity everyone could be creative. So do you have a kind of very specific prescription, just like what the doctors does to their patients, you know. And nap a day keeps doctors away. Okay, so to give us some that can actionable instructions that how can we really do something from ourselves to be creative in everyday life. Some suggestions that we would love to hear. Thank you.
Number one, I think I really want to believe that everybody is creative. In the same way as I am convinced that every person is innately curious. You know, we are born with curiosity and creativity, and we may lose that. Sometimes schools do a bad job in keeping the creativity or the curiosity alive. And to your second question, that's a tough one. Do I have a recipe? I don't have a recipe, but I think in the sense of, I believe that the default position is the enemy of curiosity, and default in the sense of getting into a habit, because we all get into a habit. It's just that's why I talked about entropy as a metaphor for that. That is the gravity is what happens all the time, right? It falls down, and it is on us to kind of keep it up. And yesterday in the advanced curriculum class that I taught, I mentioned some of the curriculum theorists, and one of it being Pinar. And Pinar talks about, in one of his articles, he talks about a research that one of our professors here did, who is now emerited, and it's Robbie McClintock. He talked about he talks about the concept of study. It's a beautiful article on the problem with curriculum and pedagogy. That's the title of the article. And so he talks about the concept of study as written, as described by Robbie McClintock, who brings it back into our life as something we really need. It needs time, it needs dedication, it needs to be something that we continue to do, and it's like we sometimes think we only grow smarter, but we don't. We can actually grow back so it's a fact, right? So I look back sometimes into my 20s, and I think, wow, back then. And then it takes time for us to regain that. And it's work. And that is actually what study can mean. And it's a beautiful term if you think of it. And that's what we do here in an educational context. It's wonderful that we have that opportunity, but it is work. And that's a little bit of a hint.
Another question? Could we have 2 more questions?
I don't know if you read just a follow-up from what you point out. I read a book called Multiple Intelligence, and I actually met him at Harvard University some time ago. And that maybe if you haven't read, can know some these questions. But my question to the panel is, what's the role of emotional intelligence in creativity itself? I'm just curious. Would you say that the most emotional intelligent people tend to be more creative in a way?
Could you?
So it's a fantastic question.
Excuse my English. Maybe I did not express myself.
Yeah. I think I could speak from my work and try not to make generalizations, because I think that for the work that I'm trying to do, there are aspects of emotional intelligence that are fundamental. that kind of an awareness of self in relationship to others is incredibly important, and it's what we're attempting to do. I have known incredibly creative people that I would categorize as narcissists, that I would say had very, very limited emotional intelligence. For me, again, I would say they're probably different kinds of creativity, and I certainly don't think that someone needs emotional intelligence to be engaged in creative activity and to be, you know, an innovator and coming up with kind of new ideas, new products, new ways of thinking. That said, you know, it's leading probably all of the work that I spoke about as a core principle of what we're attempting to do.
So I have a question for María Eugenia, actually. I think I found fascinating this idea of using the linguistic landscape, and I would like to know what are the challenges of implementing that approach in cities that, you know, don't have that access to that second language. Have you think about that?
Yeah, and this is something that came up in the presentation that we did a few weeks ago at Washington. And there were some less commonly taught languages, and they were asking us this question. And there are a vast of tools that people can use, instructors can use if they are interested. And Google Maps, they have Street View. You can download it on your computer, and then you can actually do a walk through special neighborhoods. You can go to specific countries and visit their neighborhoods. And it's amazing what you can do on the internet once you Google it, right? But there are many other options for people to do it instead of just walking out their classroom, but there are many other tools that they can use. Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for just one more question. Do you have a question?
What if we don't have access to Google? Some other alternative solutions to this scenario?
Yeah, as well, always like the fascination about books. Like, I don't know, you can go to the library, you can research about the community, you can do all these things. Traveling abroad, like bringing, I usually, when I go back to my country, I bring a lot of things to just bring in realia to my classrooms, if that is a possibility that often can be done. So I think using the linguistic landscape, it's one way of bringing the community or the culture to the classroom, but there are so many other ways that you can do that as well, through film, music, any other sorts of artistic expressions. It can be done.
Can I add one? Mm-hmm. Just to add one piece, because it's so wonderful. You're talking about how to bring it into the classroom, and you know, if I go back to that idea of participation and what kind of 2.0 technologies have enabled, I'd also be really interested in what we do to push that back out. Mm-hmm. You know, in the different mapping technologies that allow our students, as they do these kind of wonderful immersions into their neighborhood, to actually publish them, you know, for others to see and to put them in conversation with. And there certainly are lots of those. There's actually a new suite of programs that allow us to do these audio geo-mapping projects. So, you know, students could do voiceovers that are very site-specific, and then as you walk through with your technology enabled, you'll hear the kind of hotspot voiceovers. And so that thinking of it as kind of